All right, folks, let's focus on the first new moon in Aries of 2023. There's so much to talk about, and I'm going to try and distill it to the best of my ability. We're going to have the new moon. The time is going to be posted in the subject line as this gets uploaded. And it is a much awaited new moon. It brings with it the promise of spring, of course, in the Northern Hemisphere. It brings the promise astrologically, for those of you who follow various channels, a clean new beginning. I don't really believe in clean new beginnings, but as astrology goes, I think that's sort of the prevailing wisdom. Let's just a new moon is the start of a 28-day cycle. This is a normal new moon. It is not an eclipse. I will come back to the eclipses in a second, because the eclipses play a very important are an important conversation to have with this new moon. It happens just a few minutes after the sun enters the sign of Aries. It's on the day of the equinox. Let me start to break it down. The new moon is the start of a 28-day cycle. So within 24, 72 hours, the next week for some people, especially if you know where the sign of Aries sits in your chart, what house it occupies, what it stands for, energies related to that part of the chart should make their presence felt. Now, we have already had Venus transiting the sign of Aries, for about 3 weeks or so. Venus just entered Taurus a few days ago. So we've already... and Jupiter is currently in the sign of Aries, creating an auspicious new beginning, the end of a 12-year cycle and the start of a 12-year cycle in the sign of Aries. Through May, started this process on December the 28th of last year. So through May and for some part of 2022, Jupiter was in Aries as well over the summer. I think you're welcome to check the dates, between May and October. So as I discussed in my last video, there are new moons that happen and transits of personal planets, specifically the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, and sometimes Mars, depending on how close Mars is to the Sun, that happen, that put a certain amount of attention around the same time every year on the same part of our chart. The Sun certainly transits the same part of the chart every year at the same time. And depending on how the transits are occurring, the narrative of when opportunities are created, when the sort of most empowered part of that cycle occurs, the new moon cycle, when communications around that occur, all of that sort of plays out in a certain type of sequence. And sometimes certain parts of the chart in some years are highlighted more developmentally than others. As I discussed in the last video, the sign of Capricorn, which hosted the last Mercury retrograde and was supporting the sign of Taurus, where the North Node is transiting, in November, but particularly December and January of this past December 2022 and January 2023, was a much more focused and empowered and energized set of transits than, say, the transits of the Sun, Mercury, and Venus through Aquarius and even Pisces, which just finished up. And the signs of Aries in particular, and to some extent Taurus, are going to carry immense importance. And the sign of Aries right now is you have Jupiter, you have Chiron, you have Venus just completed its transit and entered into Taurus. But most importantly and relevantly, you've got the new moon conjunct Mercury, Mercury separating from the Sun, but the new moon is about a few degrees apart from Mercury, and the moon, after it becomes new, is going to conjunct Mercury. And of course, over the next couple of days, will conjunct Jupiter and then Chiron, or rather Chiron and then Jupiter. And we are getting the North Node getting ready in July to enter the sign of Aries. And we have the first of the Aries Libra eclipses in Aries on April the 19th, I believe. So we get 2 new moons in Aries every year. We either get 2 new moons or 2 full moons or some, and here we have it in Aries. So where does Aries sit in your chart? What house does it occupy? What does it stand for? And what is your relationship with that part of the chart? Those of us who are older and have had a few revolutions around the Sun and may have lived through a few eclipse cycles and a few Jupiter cycles may be able to draw parallels to new beginnings that occurred 12 or 13 years ago with the last Jupiter transit through Aries. Those of us who have even more awareness and longevity under our belt may be able to look back 28 years or so to the last set of Aries eclipses. So I let you, I know that videos are watched by people of varying degrees of awareness of your chart. So I'll let you draw those parallels. As far as this new moon is concerned, it is conjunct Mercury. It is in the very first degree of Aries, and there are two transits that are occurring around this time that are encoded into this new moon, both of which are, I would say, really, for all intents and purposes, almost overwhelmingly positive. You've got Venus conjunct the North Node happening shortly after the new moon, probably the most important and powerful transit that this new moon encodes. And then you also got Mars getting ready to trine Saturn, which I talked about in my last video, around March the 30th. So, and then, this new moon happens, and 28 days later, on April 19th, you have the new moon solar eclipse, which means in the sign of Aries, in the last degree of Aries. And so then April 19th and June the 19th will play an important role in that particular eclipse cycle. We have 3 years of Aries eclipses in 2023, 2024, and 2025. We never have, I don't think, I'm going to look again, we never have a closing lunar eclipse in Aries in any of these years. So you never have this kind of 6 months of focused energy where you've got the solar eclipse in Aries followed by 6 months later a lunar eclipse in Aries. I'm very intrigued by it. But there's something about the sign of Aries which is such a starting direct, this is what I want, a direct line between what you want and going about and getting it archetypally. It's the most assertive of signs, most directly assertive of signs, uncalculatedly assertive of signs, unfettered, unrepressed of signs, that it almost suits this kind of, every year for the next 3 years, we're going to have this spark, this fire lit, this match lit with a solar eclipse. And I'm gonna fact check that, and I'll correct it if I need to in a future video. There's a lot of talk about new beginnings with this particular new moon because of everything that I've just discussed. I will say that this is where the eclipses come in and become important. I will say it is important to understand where the sign of Aries sits in your chart. Because it is a new moon, this is certainly the start of a wave moving towards the shore, and that is true of any new moon and any new moon energy. With an eclipse, the power of change becomes even more exponential and even more exaggerated and even more powerful. So, but the new beginning nature of it, my only caution there is that it really depends on what part of the chart it's happening in. If you have a Taurus rising, and this is happening in your 12th house, it's going to have a very different feeling than if you have, for example, a Leo rising and it's happening in your 9th house. So I think that kind of awareness is important. Or if you have, is it happening in a yin house or is it happening in a yang house? Is it happening in a house that is much more secluded? Where, from an eclipse perspective, and it's also important to note that the last of the Taurus Scorpio eclipses is going to occur later this year in October. And it's important to view this year as an important transition point between energies between the Taurus and Aries parts of our chart. The North Node is going to move into Aries in July, but do not forget that Venus is now in Taurus, and in May, Jupiter is going to enter Taurus. So we have this curious and energetic handoff between the eclipses in Taurus and the North Node in Taurus. It's the eclipses that we've been asked to lean into and develop. And as the eclipses, because the eclipses move backwards and the North Node moves into Aries, you've got Jupiter, the planet that creates an auspicious new beginning and endings, start of a 12-year cycle, ending of a 12, 13-year cycle, move into Taurus. So the sign of Taurus is by no means compromised. It remains energetically important. And with one of the transits being Venus conjuncting the North Node in Taurus shortly after this new moon, this exchange of energies, this kind of sliding doors of Jupiter conjuncts Chiron and then moves into Taurus, shortly before the North Node, having conjuncted Uranus in Taurus, moves into Aries. There's a curious exchange, and you have got to, this is a general reading, to figure out what this relationship is, what has been going on in the Taurus part of your chart with the North Node transit there and Uranus is present there, and what has been going on in the Aries part of your chart with Chiron there, and more importantly, this new moon and the eclipses occurring there. There's this, and at this point in time, the conversation between these two parts of the chart is very present. There's a connection between the two because, as I said, one of the probably the most important non-lunar transit, even though it affects the North Node, so I don't know how I can really call it non-lunar, is between the North Node and Venus conjuncting. So the Taurus part of the chart is very alive and brimming. And one of the questions becomes, what is it that this new moon energy brings that supports this Venus North Node connection in Taurus? And, and with Venus North Node, opportunity, expansion of a certain kind, relationships, financial opportunity, relationship opportunity, just luck, abundance of a more mundane kind and a less dramatic kind than sometimes the eclipses provide and usually Jupiter provides. It's not quite this kind of God taking the wheel quality. It's more like it's like openings, but Venus's presence is felt really benignly and usually is the most direct kind of benefic and fortunate energy that you can experience. It's the thing that on a day-to-day basis that I would say that we feel with the greatest gratitude. It's the grease that keeps the wheels turning in a certain sense. With Jupiter's reputation as being the greater benefic and the greater lucky planet, that kind of luck is a little bit harder to judge because sometimes the luck is more in the ending than it is in the beginning. With a Jupiter transit, you can get laid off and it will create that new beginning to go in the direction that is more appropriate to you, but it may not be felt without stress. With Venus, typically, it's here, an opportunity, a relationship. Let me smooth this out. A little bit more money, a little bit. That it tends to be a more direct, immediate help. But with Venus conjuncting the North Node, the North Node is where it is that right now you need to develop and put your attention and grow your skills. Whatever it is that is going on for you, right? Here's what I would say. Here's what this new moon is about. Your life is on a path. The eclipses are shifting to the sign of Aries. And there's forward movement. And there are times that there's forward movement and there's times of static or not quite as much forward movement, and the universe is kind of allowing us to catch up with it in many respects. And we're going to have this when Mercury goes retrograde in Taurus in a few months' time. In a few weeks' time, I almost feel like saying. But I can't tell you, because I don't know your charts, where Taurus and Aries sit in your chart. So I can't tell you, there's a lot of talk about new beginnings and sparks and fire with this kind of, but ultimately, fated new beginnings related to the eclipse cycle in your chart, the next phase. How big or small or yang or yin or external or internal this is going to depend on where the sign of Aries sits in your chart and what the North Node transit and the Uranus transit in Taurus and the Chiron transit and more importantly the Jupiter transit in Aries have been brewing, and what this connection is between these two signs and the two houses they occupy in your chart and in your life right now. If Aries sits in your 12th house, it's a very different quality of what is about to follow and new beginning than if Aries sits in your 10th house of career or even in the 4th house. It's a very different quality. So fated new beginnings, energized new beginnings, and fated, it doesn't mean that you don't have control, as you know, you do. So you figure out where it is that you want to take this. I don't want to get into an argument around the fact whether or not everything is predetermined, or if it's not, and what role free will plays or not. That's not part of this discussion, although it's inevitably top of mind when we talk about eclipses. More importantly, what I will say is that as transits occur, I find that a lot depends on our ability to take advantage of, to understand those transits and to take advantage of them and to take appropriate action around them. So you've got to determine where Aries and Taurus sits in your chart and how you're going to move forward with it. For those of you who don't know your chart, with these transits, it is time to get moving, is the best that I can say. It is time to pay attention to what is going on around you, what opportunities it potentially creates. And after the new moon, over the next 48 odd hours, it is a new moon in Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, the most directly assertive, desire prone, bound, subject to yours. Not a bad idea to make a not a bad idea if you don't know where Aries sits in your chart, or even if you do and what house it occupies, to bring out a piece of paper at the very least and list your goals. List where it is that you want to go and what you want to do and what you want to accomplish and how you want to design, say, an ideal life. It's a very and to go for it and to start taking actions. Archetypally, once the sun leaves the sign of Pisces, as it does today, and enters Aries, a new year begins. So it is a new moon on the day of the zodiac new year from a Western tropical calendar. And so you can look at it as a new year beginning. You know, there's a new year that begins on January the 1st. There's a new year begins with the spring equinox. And the new year that begins for you is when the sun enters your first house. So if you know your rising sign, that is when your new year starts. Again, topic for another video, I suppose. So Mars trining Saturn, again, Mars rules Aries. So Mars is in Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in Aries right now. So Mars and Mercury are in mutual reception, the planet of action and boundaries, the planet of pursuing your goals and desires, taking direct yin masculine action, it doesn't matter what your gender is, and the planet of communication are in mutual reception. Venus, the planet of opportunity, conjuncts the North Node, where it is that you need to develop, and this new moon occurs. Archetypally, this is a match being lit, so I suggest, proverbially, please do not light any, do not take any fire-related risks as a result of this video, please. I will find different imagery. But without knowing where the sign of Aries and Taurus are in your personal charts, archetypally, this is a new moon that you can use to get moving in the direction that you want to move in. And even more will be supported in this direction, and you will see what these changes are and what the fates have planned for you as you get into the actual solar eclipse in Aries on April the 19th. And even 2 months later, June the 19th, you will, when around the time of the new moon in Gemini, you will have a sense of what exactly is brewing and what directions are opening up. So there are archetypal new moons that are more challenging. This one, I can't tell you how you'll feel it and whether you'll feel it in a more challenging way or not. That's going to depend on where the sign of Aries is in your chart. But there are archetypally, this is the gate. If you want to open the gates, if you want to start planning for 2023, even though I believe that 2023 and the opportunities were laid out for us in November, December of last year, and even though I believe that in some ways we boarded the 2023 plane, and you have previous videos in which you look at by the middle of February, the question is, as we've been moving in this direction, and as we understand where we are at right now, where do you want to take what you know and what is going on in your life right now to determine what you want next? And after this new moon, I would articulate it and I would move forward and go for it. For those of you who know your chart, look at where Aries and Taurus are in your chart. Understand that the eclipses are moving in Aries and Jupiter till May is creating a new beginning there. Understand that Jupiter will enter Taurus in May, and there will be a new beginning happening there as the last of the eclipses in Taurus occurs in October. And that's really all we need to know for now. The question, if you know your chart, or even what you've taken from this, is how do you want to take this information and start to create what you want to create? As mundane and as cheesy as that sounds. It is in that regard archetypally a pretty unfettered new moon, laced with opportunity and laced with forward movement. When we get to the eclipse, the new moons are going to then start to happen at the end of the sun's transit for a while in a particular sign. So, but that's again a topic for another discussion. I hope you found this useful. There's going to be more about the sign of Aries and the eclipse following. Just use this new moon if you can, and if you are feeling it, to get back to your priorities for what you want to create. And it is a creative, so it's not just about taking care of chores. It may be that your priorities are to manage, and there's a newness and it's in that vision boardy, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to create. It's that kind of realm. But by all means, if there are other priorities that you need to do that are going to prevent you from getting into trouble, it's an energized, energetic new moon. Go for it. All systems go. Gates are opening. Where do you want to go? What are your priorities? What do you want to create? Go for it. If you like this video, comment on it, like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, click on the bell icon on top of the subscribe button, the wiggly bell icon, to be notified when I do new videos, and more to follow soon. Thanks a lot.